Hello everyone, I hope you're going well. Today I will show you a game played by Bobby Fischer against Boris Spassky. So this game was played during their World Championship match, and during the match Bobby Fischer created some controversial moments, but once he started to play seriously, actually the chess match was very impressive, yeah. So usually Bobby Fischer always starts the game with pawn e4, but now he decided to start the game with pawn c4. Of course, he didn't choose that weapon at the moment in which he sat next to the board. Of course, he prepared that move. He knew that Boris Spassky might respond with some moves, and since he was one of the best chess players in the world, of course, he didn't study just e4 games. He had to study everything and a lot. Yeah. So pawn e6 was played by Boris Spassky, eventually castling fast. Actually, this is actually a very nice difference. The reason why we play e4 is because we want to castle very fast. If you go d4, you don't want to castle fast, but you want more pawns in the center. That is a very big difference. Your king will be longer in the center. If you go c4, it is like you go for d4. It is exactly the same point. You want more pawns in the center. So e6, knight f3, d5, and d4. Now we're having a queen's gambit declined. Knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, bishop g5. So everybody just bring the pieces out. And we're never really afraid of, some potential takes there. For a good reason, we can just go, for example, e3 or e4 and, take the pawn with the bishop. And let's say b5, let's say e3, b5, we can just take it with the knight. So there is no reason to be scared of something. So Spassky decided to just castle, and after pawn e3, Spassky went pawn h6, attacking the bishop. Let's say we play something else. Let's say we play knight d7. We can, for example, just take on d5, put the bishop out, and now we're having a very nice position. So that is the whole idea of having more pawns in the center. You have a very nice edge and some potential way to win that game in a very fascist way. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. But in every case, Spassky didn't want that to happen. So he went pawn h6. Of course, if we take, then we help black. Now black has the bishop pair, which means an advantage. So white decided to go bishop h4. Now there is still some pins going on there, and we're not giving away the bishop pair for no reason. Now Boris Spassky will play a move which is certainly decent, but it is actually a bad move. I think knight d7 was a good move right now, but he went pawn b6. There is a problem with that move. The problem is that the bishop, we don't know yet if the bishop wants to go on b7 or not. Especially after the move that Robert James Fischer played in that position. He took on d5. The problem is that if we take with the pawn, the bishop wants to go out that way. But then why did black play b6 since the bishop will go out that way? There is actually a problem. Let's say instead of doing all of that, let's say h6 and okay, let's say rook e8. Now if c takes d5, e takes d5, and the bishop can go out, and we didn't play b6. But after b6, then we played b6. That is the whole problem. So c takes d5, of course not pawn takes, it wouldn't make sense. Not only that, it will also create a lot of weaknesses on, a lot of weaknesses on the light squares. So knight takes d5. But now, of course, bishop takes e7. If knight takes, then, okay, bishop d3, and we're having a very nice position. We will play knight e5, castles, queen g4, and start eventually to attack. So this is, for example, a variation which exists, and the position is very nice. This is a very good position. So that is the reason why after bishop takes e7, black played queen takes d7, queen takes e7. Okay, 95, 95. And the problem is that now the bishop can go out that way, but he can potentially also go there, which means that actually now black just wasted a full move for no reason. But probably it is still equal, because why not? So rook c1, bring a new piece into the attack. Now let's be careful, a check like that doesn't do anything. Queen d2, and everything is very strong. Now that pawn is weak, we have to protect this pawn. Knight e5, everything is getting attacked. And even though there is nothing which wins directly, Black can't really bring the knight out for the moment. Playing f6 will weaken the whole kingside, and since there is a very strong light square bishop on the board, which is the g3 bishop, I wouldn't recommend you to play like that. So let's go back. Bishop e6 was played, but now queen a4. Bobby Fischer tries to play on the light squares. So knight bd7 isn't possible because it loses the pawn on c7. That is the reason why Boris Spassky went pawn c5. There is a problem. In that position, Bobby Fischer wanted to play on the light squares with, the bishop on b5, the queen there doing a lot of good things. But after pawn c5, all the pawns on the queen side are on dark squares, which means that the queen is doing a great job on the light squares. Also does the light square bishop. But, because there is always a problem, there is nothing on the light squares for the moment. So since there is nothing to attack on the light squares, Bobby Fischer decided to attack on the dark squares. Queen a3. Now the pawn is pinned. If the pawn moves, we get the queen, and that is not good. And we are attacking this pawn. And let's say we go knight e7. There are some problems with bishop b5, then taking on c5. The knight is somehow defending the pawn, but we can just attack the knight, which is defending the pawn, which means that we are attacking the pawn. And eventually, let's say rook c8. There might be some problems like that, and we start to just attack everything: the queen side, the king side, the center. So, just too many problems right now for black. So let's go back. Queen a3 was played and rook c8 instead of knight e7. Bishop b5 anyways. Now, if the knight comes out, again, we can take, destroy the pawn structure, or even just castle. And there is absolutely nothing that black can do. The pawn still can't move because the queen is hanging. So that is not a good position. Rook c7 exists, and we might play something like that. We would be able to apply some pressure in the center. So the position would be more or less very, very interesting. Now, after bishop b5, Boris Spassky played a6. And a6 is a very useless move. And there is a good reason on why this move is useless. So it seems like pawn a6 attacks the bishop, but the pawn can't move because it is pinned. Bobby Fischer saw that, and he decided to actually play dynamic chess. He took on c5. Dynamic chess means that we are playing something which is forcing a response, or we are looking for checks, for captures, we're looking for threats making, and d takes c5 is a very nice forcing move. Now it forces a response on the other side. So if rook takes, we can just take, and let's say we take with pieces, in the end of the day, actually, I'm not sure that we have to take. I think we can even just... Actually, that's funny. After rook takes, I think we can even just castle. Because if rook takes c1, the queen is hanging. And if rook takes b5, we can take the queen again. And pawn takes is losing the rook. So actually, after castling, white is having a very nice position because his pawn on d5 is isolated, and his pawn isn't protected by other pawns. And that is a problem. You prefer to have your pawns together, which are defending each other. Now in that position, it wasn't the case. This pawn is weak and alone. Okay, so let's go back. D takes c5, taking with the queen is ridiculous. There is a rook on c5, so pawn takes c5. But why? Why did Bobby Fischer do that? For a good reason. After castling, it's difficult to find a good move for black. So the problem that black does have is that if this knight moves away, the pawn on a6 might be lost, the pawn on c5 is a huge target, we can play knight d4 and harass all black's pieces, because if pawn takes knight, the queen is hanging. So Spassky starts to face quite a lot of troubles. There is nothing concrete yet, but there is just a lot of pressure. Rook a7. Now he's actually attacking the bishop on b5, since the rook is protected by the queen. Bobby Fischer, of course, saw that. He went back on e2, and black played knight d7, and yeah, the knight is super strong. Let's be careful. If we take on a6, it seems like we're winning a pawn and we are attacking the rook. There's rook c8, and now the bishop is lost because if the bishop moves away, we lose the queen. So let's go back. After knight d7, Bobby Fischer saw that the queen wasn't protected by the rook anymore, So Bobby Fischer used that and played knight d4. He wants to get the bishop on e6. But why? Because the bishop on e6 is actually defending the pawn on d5, so he wants to get rid of it. Bishop f3, rook fd8, rook fd1, I'm sorry, and this is a very nice position for white. So queen f8, now everything is protected. But Bobby Fischer doesn't care. He takes anyways on e6, f takes e6, and now, since all the pawns are on the light squares, we have to attack the light squares. Boom, e4, triple, quadruple, exclamation mark. This move is very, very strong. And the reason why this move is strong is because no matter what happens, we will attack these pawns in the center, either by playing rook fd1 or bishop f3. And if you take there, you don't need to be a grandmaster to understand that all these pawns are very weak. Bishop c4 attacking the pawn, rook e1 attacking the other pawn on e4, and even though black is up a pawn, there is no good way to protect all of them. So let's say d4, which is the move which was played during the game. Now Bobby Fischer saw that playing bishop c4 is strong. But since we can play bishop c4 anyways, and after bishop c4 now there is a very huge problem of eventually knight e5. Probably it isn't a problem, but if black can sacrifice the exchange like that for a passed pawn and a very strong knight on e5, probably it is okay. It is still worth a shot because we are up in exchange, but probably we prefer to be sure that this bishop there is actually attacking something, because if black doesn't go knight e5 but goes, I don't know, rook e8, we are not really threatening something. That's why Bobby Fischer thought that he could go bishop c4 whenever he wants to, so he played f4. Now, let's say you play a random move, I can go bishop c4 and f5, and now I'm attacking everything. And if the king moves out of the way, we can just take the pawn, attack the queen, and win the game. Because if knight f6, e5, pin. Yeah, simple chess. That is the reason why after f4, Spassky went queen e7. Of course, he saw all the problems, but Bobby Fischer doesn't really care. Now, Bobby Fischer wants to go f5. But if you go f5, pawn takes, let's say pawn takes, the bishop is hanging, so we have to play check first. The king goes away, pawn takes. But this pawn isn't doing anything right now. We can go knight f6, I guess, or we're not even forced to go knight f6. We can even just go rook e8. The problem is that this pawn on f5 isn't doing so much for the moment. And that is why Bobby Fischer went e5. The idea is that if he manages to go f5 and pawn takes, now white will have a pawn on e5, which is actually a passed pawn. And a passed pawn is strong because it can, go to the eighth rank and promote to a queen, for example. So after e5, Spassky went rook b8. The idea of rook b8 is that he wants to fight for some counterplay on the queen side. We are on the queen side, so we want to attack there. But bishop c4. Now Bobby Fischer sees that since the pawn on e6 is weak, it means that the king is weak. Spassky understood that, and he went king h8. Now, even if we take that pawn, it won't be with check. Bobby Fischer saw that the king is alone. He saw that all these pawns can potentially march forward, so he attacked the only pawn which is stopping white from marching forward, the e6 pawn, queen h3. Now he's attacking on e6, and it's difficult to find a good way to protect this pawn. If you go rook e8, then you wasted a move on rook b8, rook e8. So knight f8 was played, but now this move isn't, this piece isn't really active right now. It isn't a good position. Okay, the pawn on b2 is hanging. Bobby Fischer doesn't want to lose that pawn. He goes pawn b3. Easy peasy. And Bobby Fischer isn't really scared of these two pawns and this passed pawn on d4. The thing is, this pawn is on the dark squares, and every time it marches forward, the bishop can take it. So there is no need to worry about that pawn. a5. Spassky tries to attack on the queen side. f5. So white, this is white's camp, and this is black's camp, easy peasy. The thing is, if one of your pawns manages to go on the other side, usually it can be a weakness, or it happens sometimes that this pawn isn't a weakness at all. And this is exactly the case right now. Now the threat is actually to go pawn f6 and okay, let's say a bad move, pawn f6, and if pawn takes, we take on h6, and the king is very, 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 very weak. Very weak. Very, very, very weak. Very weak. So we have to stop that. That is why after f5, Boris Spassky took on f5. Now you can take with the queen or with the rook. Taking with the queen isn't threatening anything, so he took with the rook. The idea is to put the other rook on f1 and use all his pieces in the attack. Knight h7 and rook cf1. See, he's just using all his pieces. Knight g5 does make sense, attacking the queen, but since the queen can just go on h5, black isn't achieving anything right now, and there are some potential problems of take there, or if the queen goes away, the knight on g5 is hanging since the pawn is pinned. So knight g5 doesn't change anything of the nature and the position. So queen d8. He's just afraid of, rook f7 attacking the queen. Queen g3. Now he wants rook f7, and once rook f7 will be played, he will be threatening checkmate on g7. So rook e7, the idea is actually to attack this pawn on e5. Okay, now it is protected, but it is strategy. You're not sure that you might have something tactical, but you're helping your pieces to have some tactical chances. So h4. Bobby Fischer just wants to bring more pawns into the attack, and Bobby Fischer doesn't want to see a knight jumping on e5, e4, and then pushing the past d pawn. That would be a problem, so he stops that. Pawn h4. Rook bb7, so now everything is protected like that, but something isn't protected anymore. In that position, the back rank was fully protected. Now it isn't. There are only two pieces guarding that square. So pawn e6. So the full idea of that move is actually to play rook f7 again. It was also another idea. Let's say you don't go h4. Let's say we waste a move. Okay, let's say we go that, this, and this. Knight g5 can be a problem. Okay, not right now because there is rook f8, but he wants to stop any potential problems like that. So in the game, this was played, and rook bc7. Boris Spassky doesn't know what to go for, and that's normal. His position is basically hopeless. He went queen e5. The idea of queen e5 is eventually to go rook f7 again. So queen e8, and now rook f7 can be played whenever he wants to, so he's just preparing himself. He goes a4, because queen e8 is also preparing an a4 pawn push, and he stops that. Usually, if you play chess, you want to win, and your opponent stops your counterplay like that, it's normal that you want to cry. And, nobody would actually everybody understands why you would cry in that type of position. So queen d8, Spassky doesn't know what to do. All white pieces are just perfectly placed. Rook 1 f2. Again, he's making sure that never this passed d pawn will actually promote. Queen e8, rook 2 f3. He's taking some time. Queen d8, bishop d3. Now he's just putting all his pieces on the g file and eventually on this b1 h7 diagonal. And the attack is just coming. Queen e8, queen d8. Yeah, Boris Spassky can't do anything else. Queen e4, threatening check. Okay, let's say a bad move. Check. Queen takes, we take. Knight takes, we get the queen because we took the queen. And if knight takes, we can take the knight and checkmate. So queen e4 was played, knight f6, and now, of course, rook takes f6. Why? Because it was the only defender. G takes f6, rook takes f6. So now there are a multiple choice of threats. We can take on h6, we can go h5, we can go queen f4. Yeah, we can do whatever we want to. So rook g8 stops rook h6 with check. Bishop c4, he's protecting his pawn, and if one day this pawn marches forward, the king will be attacked. So king h8, and now queen f4. In that position, Bobby Fischer is attacking on h6, threatening some potential checkmates, and threatening rook f8, which wins the queen. Let's say you go king g8, we can at the very, very, very least take on h6, but we can also play rook f7. The threat is check and mate, and if we take, pawn takes, fork, and if rook takes, actually we're not even forced to take. We can just take everything. It is probably not a clear way to win. Let me show you. Actually, after king there, I think we can just take the pawn and it's lost. Yeah, or even something like that. I wouldn't be surprised if something like that works because of the check and the fork on f8. Probably it doesn't work, but it is still an idea that exists. So after queen f4, there is just there is just nothing. That is very funny, but there is nothing, and Boris Spassky resigned. Now, the question is, how would you defend this position? If you go king g8 again, it is a very interesting position because taking on h6 not only wins because of rook g6 checkmate, but because if we try to go rook g7, there is still e7 check. We have to stop with the queen. We can promote with checkmate because the queen is pinned. So the question is, how would you defend? There is no way to defend. But if you find a good way to hold as long as possible, it means that you're a good chess player. Thank you very much. See you in the future. Take care.